The transport ship landed on the frozen surface of Kepler 442c with a loud thud that shook the entire vessel. Ice crystals scattered in all directions as the landing thrusters melted the ground beneath them. Dr. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window and looked out at the white wasteland that stretched to the horizon. This moon was nothing like Earth. Everything here was white, cold, and deadly. Jake grabbed his old military duffel bag from the overhead compartment. The bag was worn and patched in several places, but it had served him well through 20 years of survival training in Alaska. He wore simple clothes, thick wool pants, a heavy jacket, and boots that had walked through more snow than most aliens had ever seen. At 42 years old, Jake had spent half his life teaching people how to stay alive in places that wanted to kill them. Captain Lisa Grant waited at the airlock door. She was a small woman with short black hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Lisa had been running Horizon Base for 3 years, and she knew every person who came through her station. She shook Jake's hand when he stepped off the transport. "Welcome to the ice ball, Dr. Morrison," Lisa said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I hope you brought your warm socks." Jake looked around the landing bay. The walls were thick metal covered with a layer of frost. Even inside the heated building, he could feel the cold trying to get in. How cold does it get out there? Good day, -100. When the storms come, we have seen -200. Lisa led him through a series of doors that hissed when they opened. The aliens think their fancy gear will keep them warm. We will see about that. They walked down a long hallway lined with windows that looked out onto the research station. Horizon Base was built like a series of connected domes, each one designed to withstand the terrible weather of this moon. Jake could see people moving between the buildings through covered walkways. Most of them were human, but he spotted a few aliens in the mix. "Tell me about our test subjects," Jake said as they walked. Lisa pulled out a small tablet and read from it. 3 species. The Zephyrians come from a desert world where it never gets cold. They are tall, thin, and made of some kind of crystal material. Very proud of their heating technology. Their scientist is named Kethval, and he talks too much. They stopped at another door, and Lisa punched in a code. Then we have the Aquari. They live on ocean worlds and breathe water as well as air. Their body temperature changes with their environment, like fish. Marilana is their survival expert, though I am not sure how much she knows about surviving in cold. The door opened into a large room filled with equipment. Jake saw suits hanging on walls, boxes of gear stacked everywhere, and computer screens showing weather data. And the third group? Thermals. They are made of energy, like living fire. Flame Core 7 is their representative. He thinks the cold cannot hurt him because he generates his own heat. Lisa laughed, but it was not a happy sound. All 3 species volunteered to test their survival methods against the worst storm this moon can produce. Jake set his bag down on a metal table and opened it. Inside was gear that looked ancient compared to the high-tech equipment around them. He pulled out a simple knife with a wooden handle, some rope, and tools that might have been used by humans. 1,000 years ago. Where are they now? In the main lab, probably arguing about whose technology is better. Lisa watched Jake organize his simple gear. "You really think that stuff will work better than their advanced systems?" "I think staying alive is not about having the best technology," Jake said as he checked the edge of his knife. "It is about understanding the environment and working with it instead of fighting it." They left the equipment room and walked deeper into the base. The main laboratory was a huge space filled with alien technology that Jake did not recognize. 3 beings stood around a table covered with strange devices. The first was tall and thin, with skin that looked like clear crystal. Light seemed to move through his body in patterns that shifted as he talked. This had to be Kethval. The second alien was shorter and looked wet even though she was not in water. Her skin was smooth and dark green, and she breathed through slits in her neck as well as her mouth. Marilana moved with the fluid grace of something that spent most of its life swimming. The third being was the strangest of all. Flame Core 7 looked like a person made of bright orange light. He had no solid body that Jake could see, just energy that held a roughly human shape. Heat waves rose from his form, making the air around him shimmer. "Ah, the human has arrived," HFY said in a voice that sounded like wind blowing through crystal chimes. "We were just discussing the inadequacy of primitive survival methods in extreme environments." Marilana turned to look at Jake with large, dark eyes. "Your species has a reputation for stubbornness, but surely you must see that technology is superior to your simple tools." Flame Core 7's voice was like the sound of a campfire crackling. "The cold cannot touch beings like us who generate our own heat. Your flesh-based biology makes you vulnerable." Jake walked over to the table and looked at their equipment. He saw devices that glowed with internal light, suits that looked like they were made from liquid metal, and machines that hummed with energy. Everything was sleek, advanced, and expensive-looking. "Impressive gear," he said simply. "Each piece represents thousands of years of technological development," HFY said proudly. "My crystal heating matrix can maintain perfect temperature. In any environment, the mathematics involved are quite complex. My biothermal generators work with my natural body chemistry," Marilana added. "They amplify my ability to regulate temperature, making me immune to cold." Flame Core 7 pulsed brighter. "And I am energy itself. Cold is merely the absence of heat, and I carry heat within my very being." Jake nodded and pulled his simple gear from his bag. The aliens looked at his knife, rope, and basic tools with what he assumed was amusement, though it was hard to tell with faces so different from human ones. "The storm will hit in 6 hours," Captain Grant announced from across the room. "Weather systems show it will be a Category 5, with winds over 300 kilometers per hour and temperatures dropping to minus 210 degrees Celsius." The aliens showed no concern. They continued checking their advanced equipment and talking about the science behind their survival systems. Jake quietly packed his gear and went to study the weather data. The storm looked bad, worse than anything he had faced on Earth, but storms were storms and cold was cold. The principles that kept humans alive in Alaska would work here too, if he was smart about it. As the hours passed, the base grew quiet. Everyone was preparing for the test. Jake found a corner and sat down to think about what he would need to do. The aliens were confident in their technology, but technology could fail. When it did, knowledge and skill were all that stood between life and death. He had both earned through years of training in the worst places Earth had to offer. Outside, the wind was already starting to pick up. The real test was about to begin. The first blast of wind hit Horizon Base like a giant hammer. The entire structure shook and groaned as the storm announced its arrival. Jake stood at the main airlock, watching the weather readings climb higher and higher. The temperature had already dropped to minus 150 degrees, and the storm was just getting started. Captain Grant's voice came over the communication system. "All test subjects report to your designated zones. The survival test begins now. You have 12 hours to prove your methods work." HFY stepped forward, his crystal body glowing brighter as his heating systems activated. "My matrix is already compensating for the temperature drop. The mathematics are perfect." He moved toward the airlock with confidence, his tall frame shimmering with internal light. Marilana checked her biothermal generators one last time. Small lights pulsed along her arms and legs where the devices were attached to her skin. "My body temperature is stable. The generators are working as designed." She followed the Zephyrian to the exit, her movement still graceful despite the heavy equipment. Flame Core 7 burned brighter than before, his energy form crackling with power. "I feel nothing from this cold. It cannot touch what I am." He moved past the others, leaving heat waves in the air behind him. Jake was the last to approach the airlock. He wore layers of simple clothing and carried his old bag of basic tools. No lights, no advanced systems, no energy fields. Just a human. With knowledge passed down through generations of survivors, the airlock door opened with a hiss, and the storm hit them like a living thing. The wind was so strong it knocked Marilana sideways before she could steady herself. Snow and ice flew through the air like bullets, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. The sound was deafening, like standing inside a tornado made of razor blades. Each species had been assigned a different test zone about 500 meters from the base. They would have to reach their areas, build shelter, and survive until the storm passed. Communication devices would let the base monitor their progress, but no help would come unless someone was about to die. HFY headed north, his crystal body cutting through the wind like a living lighthouse. His heating matrix was working, hard now, glowing bright red as it fought against the cold. The Zephyrian moved with purpose, confident that his technology would protect him. Merlana went east, her biothermal generators humming louder as they tried to maintain her body temperature. The wind pushed her around, and she had to fight for every step. Her amphibious nature was not designed for this kind of environment, but she trusted her equipment to keep her alive. Flame Core 7 drifted west, his energy form flickering as the wind tried to scatter his essence. He was still bright, but Jake noticed that he was not quite as brilliant as before. The thermal pressed forward, leaving a trail of melted snow in his wake. Jake turned south and began walking into the teeth of the storm. The wind tried to knock him down, but he leaned into it and kept moving. He had faced blizzards before, though never anything this strong. The key was to stay calm and think clearly. Panic killed more people in survival situations than the cold ever did. After 30 minutes of fighting through the storm, Jake reached his test zone. The wind was so loud he could barely hear his own thoughts. Snow was falling so hard it was like being inside a white tunnel. He dropped his bag and looked around for what he needed. The communication device in his pocket crackled with static. Through the noise, he could hear the others reporting their progress. HFY's voice came through first, though it was hard to understand. Crystal matrix operating at full capacity. Beginning shelter construction using thermal barriers. There was a pause filled with static. Temperature regulation holding steady. Marlana's report came next, her voice strained. Biothermal generators responding to environmental stress. Power output increasing to compensate for heat loss. Shelter construction beginning. Flame Core 7's voice was fainter than before. Energy levels stable. Cold presents no significant threat. Proceeding with shelter establishment. Jake keyed his own communicator. Morrison here. Beginning shelter construction using local materials. He did not mention that the local materials were just snow and ice. Let them figure that out for themselves. An hour into the storm, the first problems began. HFY's voice came over the radio, and this time he sounded worried. Crystal matrix experiencing thermal shock. Temperature differential greater than calculated parameters. Attempting compensation, Jake paused in his work to listen. He was cutting blocks of hard-packed snow with his knife, selecting each piece carefully. The wind was trying to steal his body heat, but his layered clothing was holding it in. He was cold, but not dangerously so. Marlana's next report was worse. Biothermal generators drawing more power than expected. Body temperature dropping despite full system activation. Shelter construction difficult due to equipment malfunction. The storm was getting stronger. The wind now screamed at over 250 kilometers per hour, and the temperature had dropped to minus 180 degrees. Jake could feel the cold trying to get through his clothes, but he kept working. He had a plan, and he was going to stick to it. Flame Core 7's voice was much dimmer now. Energy output decreasing due to environmental factors. Cold appears to be affecting plasma cohesion. Shelter construction proceeding slowly. Jake smiled grimly as he continued cutting snow blocks. The aliens were learning that advanced technology was not always the answer. Their equipment was designed for controlled environments, not for the chaos of a real survival situation. When technology failed, you needed skills that did not depend on machines. 2 hours into the storm, HFY's heating matrix began to fail completely. His voice over the radio was weak and filled with static. Critical system failure. Crystal structure compromised by thermal stress. Emergency protocols activated. Marlana was not doing much better. Biothermal generators offline. Body entering hibernation mode to conserve energy. Shelter incomplete. Flame Core 7 barely managed to transmit at all. Energy levels critical. Plasma form destabilizing. Require immediate assistance. Jake had been expecting this. He keyed his communicator and spoke calmly into the howling wind. Morrison to base. Alien subjects experiencing equipment failure. Beginning rescue operations. Captain Grant's voice crackled back. Understood, Jake. Emergency team standing by, but we cannot reach you in this storm. You are on your own. Jake looked at the structure he had been building. It was nearly complete, a dome made entirely of snow blocks cut from the ground around him. The blocks fit together perfectly, each one placed according to principles his ancestors had learned thousands of years ago. The shelter looked primitive, but it was solid and growing warmer inside with each passing minute. He grabbed his gear and prepared to go find the aliens. They had mocked his simple tools and ancient knowledge, but now those same tools and that same knowledge were going to save their lives. The storm raged around him as he stepped back into the wind, but Morrison was no longer fighting the environment. He was working with it, the way humans had always done when survival was all that mattered. Jake tied a rope around his waist and secured the other end to his nearly finished igloo. The wind was so strong it could blow him away from his shelter if he was not careful. He pulled his hood tight and stepped into the storm, following the faint emergency beacon signals from the aliens' communication devices. The first signal came from the north, where Kethval had gone. Jake fought his way through snow that was now waist deep, using his simple compass to stay on course. The wind tried to push him sideways with every step, but he had learned long ago how to walk in storms like this. He moved slowly and deliberately, testing each step before putting his full weight down. After 20 minutes of struggling through the blizzard, Jake found the Zephyrian. Kethval was curled up behind a half-built wall of ice blocks that his crystal heating matrix had tried to melt together. But the wall was cracking and falling apart as the extreme cold made the ice brittle. The alien's crystal body was dim now, barely glowing at all. "Kethval," Jake shouted over the wind, "can you hear me?" The Zephyrian turned his head slowly. His crystal face was covered with frost, and his internal light was flickering like a dying bulb. "Human, my technology has failed." "The mathematics were wrong. I am dying." Jake knelt beside the alien and checked his condition. Kethval's crystal structure was developing stress fractures from the rapid temperature changes. His heating matrix was completely dead, just a cold piece of metal now. "You are not dying yet," Jake said. "But you will be if we do not get you warm." "Impossible. The temperature is minus 200 degrees. Nothing can survive this without advanced life support." Kethval's voice was weak and full of despair. Jake pulled out his knife and began cutting blocks from the snow around them. "You are wrong about that. My people have survived in cold like this for thousands of years." He worked quickly but carefully, selecting pieces of snow that were just the right density and size. "What are you doing?" Kethval watched as Jake began building a small shelter around them, making us a place to get warm. Jake continued cutting and placing blocks, working with practiced skill even in the howling wind. Snow is actually a good insulator when you use it right. The Zephyrian was too weak to argue, so he watched as Jake built walls around them. Within minutes, they were enclosed in a small dome made entirely of snow blocks. The wind noise became muffled, and Jake could hear his own breathing again. "This is still just frozen water," Kethval said. "How can it make us warmer?" Jake pulled out a small device that looked like an ancient fire starter. He scraped it against his knife blade, and sparks flew into a small pile of material he had brought from his pack. A tiny flame appeared, and Jake carefully fed it until he had a small fire burning in a metal cup. "Air?" Jake said simply. "Snow. Has air trapped inside it?" "Air does not conduct heat very well, so it insulates. The blocks keep the wind out, and our body heat warms the air inside." Kethval felt his crystal body slowly beginning to warm up. The stress fractures stopped spreading, and his internal light grew slightly brighter. "This is impossible." "You're Primitive technology should not work better than our advanced systems. It works because it is simple, Jake said as he fed more material to his small fire. Simple things do not break as easily as complex ones. And they work even when you do not have power or spare parts. Jake left the small heater with HFY and prepared to go back into the storm. Stay here and keep warm. I need to find the others. Wait, the Zephyrian called out. How do you know this shelter will not collapse? Jake smiled, though HFY could not see it through his hood. Because my ancestors built thousands of these over thousands of years, they learned what works and what does not. The knowledge does not need batteries or replacement parts. Jake went back into the storm, following his rope back to his own shelter. Then he untied it and headed east, toward Marlana's last known position. The storm was at its worst now, with winds over 300 kilometers per hour and visibility. Near 0. He found the Aquarii collapsed beside a pile of high-tech equipment that had frozen solid. Her biothermal generators were dead, covered in ice that had formed when their heat output failed. Marlana was unconscious, her body in deep hibernation to conserve what little energy she had left. Jake quickly built another small shelter around the alien, working even faster this time, because he knew she was closer to death than HFY had been. When the dome was complete, he started another small fire and began warming the air inside. Marlana's eyes opened slowly. Human, how am I still alive? You are tougher than you think, Jake said, but your equipment is not. It was not designed for this kind of extreme cold. My biothermal generators were supposed to be perfect, she said weakly. The engineers said they could handle any environment. Engineers work in laboratories, Jake replied as he adjusted his small heater. Nature does not follow the same rules as laboratories. Out here, only things that have been tested by real survival work. Jake left Marlana with her own heater and went back into the storm one more time. Flame Core 7 was the furthest away, and the storm was getting worse with each passing hour. The temperature had dropped to minus 215 degrees. Colder than anything recorded on this moon before. He found the thermal barely visible in the snow. His energy formed dim and scattered. Flame Core 7 was losing cohesion, his plasma essence spreading out and cooling in the extreme cold. Without help, he would dissipate completely within minutes. Jake built his third emergency shelter as fast as he could, racing against time as the alien's life force faded. When the dome was complete, he started the biggest fire yet, knowing that an energy being would need more heat than the others. I was wrong, Flame Core 7 whispered as his form slowly pulled back together. In the warm air, I thought I understood heat and cold. But this cold is different. It steals energy in ways I did not expect. Cold is cold, Jake said simply. It does not care what you are made of. It just takes heat away until there is nothing left. Jake sat back and looked at his 3 small shelters, each one keeping an alien alive in conditions that had defeated their advanced technology. His own igloo was still waiting for him, larger and more comfortable than these emergency domes. All of them were built with nothing but snow, basic tools, and knowledge that was older than any of the alien civilizations. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the shelters warmth was growing. Jake had saved 3 lives using methods that their people would have called primitive and useless. But primitive did not mean inferior. Sometimes the old ways worked better than the new ones, especially when survival was the only thing that mattered. All subjects accounted for and stable, Jake spoke into his communicator, riding out the storm in temporary shelters. We'll move to main shelter when conditions improve. Captain Grant's voice crackled back through the static. Outstanding work. Jake, the aliens' people are very interested in your methods. Jake smiled as he prepared to check on his guests one more time. They would all survive the night, and tomorrow they would learn that sometimes the best technology was no technology at all. The storm began to weaken as dawn approached, though the wind still howled at over 200 kilometers per hour. Jake moved between the 3 emergency shelters, checking on his alien guests. Each one was alive and growing stronger as their bodies recovered from near-death experiences. Time to move, Jake announced as he entered HFY's shelter. Zephyrian's crystal body was glowing steadily now, though much dimmer than before. The main shelter is bigger and more comfortable. We can all wait out the rest of the storm. Together, HFY looked at the snow walls around him with new respect. This simple structure saved my life. I do not understand how frozen water can provide better insulation than our crystal heating matrix. You will understand soon enough, Jake said as he helped the alien to his feet. First, we need to get you to safety. Jake led HFY through the storm, following his rope back to the main igloo. The Zephyrian moved slowly, his crystal legs still weak from the extreme cold. When they reached the dome-shaped shelter, Jake opened the small entrance and guided his guest inside. HFY stopped at the entrance and stared. The igloo was much larger inside than it appeared from outside. The walls curved up to form a perfect dome overhead, and the temperature was warm enough that ice was melting and refreezing on the inner surface. A small platform of snow served as a bench, and there was room for several people to sit comfortably. "This is impossible," HFY said as he looked around. "The interior temperature must be 50 degrees warmer than outside. How can walls made of snow create such warmth?" Jake smiled as he settled onto the snow bench. "Sit down and rest. I will explain everything when the others get here." Jake made 2 more trips through the storm, bringing Marilana and then Flame Core 7 to the igloo. Each alien reacted the same way when they entered the shelter. They could not believe that something so simple could work so well. Marilana touched the walls with her webbed hands. "The surface is smooth and slightly wet. The ice is actually melting from the warmth inside." Flame Core 7's energy form had pulled itself back together completely in the warm air. "I can feel heat radiating from the walls themselves. This structure is storing and reflecting thermal energy." "Now you are starting to understand," Jake said, as the 3 aliens settled around him in the spacious igloo. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside they were comfortable and safe. This shelter works because it follows natural laws that do not change. HFY leaned forward, his crystal face reflecting the dim light that filtered through the snow walls. "Explain these laws to us. Our technology failed completely, but your primitive methods succeeded." Jake picked up a handful of snow from near the entrance. "First, understand what snow really is. This is not solid ice. It is millions of tiny ice crystals with air trapped between them. Air is one of the best insulators in the universe." He squeezed the snow in his hand, and water dripped between his fingers. "When I built these walls, I selected snow with the right density. Too loose and it will not hold together. Too tight and it becomes solid ice with no insulating air." Marilana watched the water drip from Jake's hand. "But how does the structure create heat?" "You are not generating energy like our machines do." "I am not creating heat," Jake corrected. "I am trapping the heat that already exists. Your bodies produce heat just by being alive. This shelter keeps that heat from escaping into the cold." Outside, Jake pointed to the curved walls around them. "The dome shape is important too. It is the strongest structure you can build with these materials. The curve distributes the weight evenly, so the walls support each other, and the smooth surface inside reflects heat back toward the center." Flame Core 7 pulsed brighter as he processed this information. "You are using the environment against itself. The cold outside helps compress the walls, making them stronger and tighter." "Exactly," Jake nodded. "The colder it gets outside, the better this shelter works. Your technology fought against the environment. This shelter works with it." HFY ran his crystal hand along the smooth inner wall. "The mathematics of thermodynamics should make this impossible. These walls are made of frozen water. They should conduct cold, not block it. Your mathematics work fine in controlled conditions," Jake replied. "But survival is not about controlled conditions. It is about understanding how nature really works, not how we think it should work." Jake stood up and walked to the center of the igloo. "My ancestors learned these principles through thousands of years of trial and error. Every generation added to the knowledge. The people who built shelters that did not work died in the cold. The people who built shelters that did work lived to teach their children. Merlana tilted her head, her large eyes reflecting the soft light. So this knowledge was tested by survival itself. Only the methods that actually worked were passed down. That is right, Jake said. No laboratory, no computer simulation, no theoretical mathematics. Just real people in real survival situations, learning what keeps you alive and what gets you killed. The three aliens sat quietly for a moment, absorbing this information. Their advanced civilizations had developed technology that could cross between stars, but they had forgotten the basic principles of survival that Jake's people had never lost. There is more, Jake continued. The entrance to this shelter is below the main floor level. Cold air is heavier than warm air, so the cold stays down by the entrance while the warm air rises to where we are sitting. Flame Core 7 looked at the small entrance tunnel, a thermal trap. The coldest air cannot reach the living space. And the entrance is small on purpose, Jake added. It keeps the wind from blowing directly inside, but it is large enough for air to flow in and out. We need fresh air to breathe, but we do not want to lose all our heat. Kethval shook his crystal head slowly. We brought machines that cost more than some starships. You brought a knife and some rope. Yet your methods work better than ours. Jake sat back down on the snow bench. Simple tools can be more reliable than complex machines. A knife does not need power or spare parts. It works the same way every time, as long as you know how to use it. The storm outside was finally beginning to weaken, but the four of them remained in the warm igloo. Jake had more to teach, and the aliens were eager to learn. They had nearly died because they trusted technology more than knowledge, and they did not want to make that mistake again. Tell us more about these survival principles, Merlana said. Our people need to understand how your species has survived in so many dangerous environments. Jake smiled and settled in for a long conversation. The real lesson was just beginning. The storm finally began to die down as the sun rose over the frozen horizon. Jake could hear the wind dropping from a scream to a howl, then to a strong breeze. After 18 hours of deadly weather, Kepler 4.2c was showing its gentler side. Though gentle here still meant temperatures cold enough to kill. The storm is ending, Jake announced to his three alien students. They had spent the last 6 hours in the igloo while he explained the principles behind human survival techniques. The aliens had asked hundreds of questions, and Jake had answered every one. Kethval stood up carefully, his crystal body much stronger now than when Jake had found him dying in the snow. I want to examine the construction of this shelter from the outside. The engineering principles you described seem impossible, yet here we are, alive and comfortable. Good idea, Jake said as he moved toward the entrance. But first, let me show you how to exit safely. Jake crawled through the small entrance tunnel and stood up outside the igloo. The three aliens followed him, emerging into a world transformed by the storm. Snow drifts reached higher than Jake's head in some places, and the landscape looked completely different than before, but the igloo stood exactly as Jake had built it. The dome was perfect, with no cracks or damage despite winds that had reached over 300 kilometers per hour. The structure looked like it had grown from the ground itself, a natural part of the frozen environment. Incredible, Merlana said as she walked around the shelter. The wind carved the snow away from the base, but the dome itself is untouched. The shape must have deflected the airflow over and around it. Flame Core 7 pulsed with curiosity as he examined the walls. I can see the individual blocks now. Each one fits perfectly with its neighbors, no gaps, no weak points. This is precision engineering using the most basic tools. Jake's communicator crackled to life. Morrison, this is base. Storm has passed and rescue teams are heading your way. What is your status? All 4 test subjects alive and well, Jake replied. No injuries, no equipment failures, ready for pickup. Outstanding. Transport will arrive in 30 minutes. The alien governments have been monitoring the test results, and they want a full report on your methods. Jake looked at his 3 companions, who were still studying the igloo with fascination. I think they are going to get more than a report. The rescue transport arrived exactly on schedule, landing near the test zone with its engines melting the snow into steam. Captain Grant was aboard, along with several other humans and a few more aliens that Jake had not met before. "Dr. Morrison," Captain Grant said as she stepped off the transport, "I have to say, we were worried when all the alien equipment failed, but your signal stayed strong the whole time." "Simple technology is reliable technology," Jake replied. "These three learned that lesson the hard way." The new aliens approached cautiously. They wore heavy environmental suits and carried advanced scanning equipment. One of them, a tall being with 4 arms and blue skin, spoke in a translator device. "I am Science Leader Vex Prime of the Centauri Council. We have been monitoring this test from orbit. Our instruments showed impossible readings from your shelter. The internal temperature was consistently 50 degrees warmer than the external environment." Jake smiled. "Not impossible. Just simple physics applied correctly." Another alien, this one short and round with silver skin, waddled forward. "I am Engineer Zolbeta from the Rigel Consortium. Our computer models predicted that primitive construction methods would fail within the first hour of the storm. Yet our colleagues survived 18 hours in comfort." "Computer models work with assumptions," Jake said. "Survival works with reality. Sometimes reality does not match the assumptions." Kethval stepped forward to address his fellow aliens. "We nearly died because we trusted our technology more than we trusted knowledge. This human saved our lives using methods that his ancestors developed thousands of years ago. The heating matrix that cost more than a starship failed completely," Merlana added. "But a shelter built with a simple knife worked perfectly. We have much to learn from human survival techniques." Flame Core 7 burned brighter as he spoke. To the other energy beings in the group, "I discovered that being made of energy does not make one immune to environmental threats. The human's understanding of thermal dynamics saved my existence." Science Leader Vex Prime turned to Jake. "Dr. Morrison, the Centauri Council formally requests that you teach these survival methods to our people. We will provide any resources you need." Engineer Zolbeta nodded enthusiastically. "The Rigel Consortium agrees. We want to establish training programs based on your techniques. Our colonies face many dangerous environments." More requests came from the other aliens present. Each species wanted to learn the survival skills that had kept humans alive on countless hostile worlds. Jake listened to all of them, then held up his hand for silence. "I will teach anyone who wants to learn," Jake said. "But you need to understand something important. These techniques cannot be learned from books or computer programs. They must be practiced in real conditions until they become instinct." "We are prepared for that," Vex Prime said. "Whatever it takes." Jake looked back at the Igloo one more time. "Then we start with the basics. First, you learn to see the environment as a partner, not an enemy. Nature provides everything you need to survive if you know how to use it." The group began walking back toward the transport, but Jake noticed that the 3 aliens who had shared his shelter stayed close to him. They had experienced something that changed their understanding of survival, technology, and the relationship between the two. "Dr. Morrison," Kethval said quietly, "will you teach us more than just shelter building? We want to understand all of human survival knowledge." "There is always more to learn," Jake replied. "My people have been surviving for thousands of years on worlds that wanted to kill them. Each environment teaches different lessons." Merlana nodded eagerly. "We want to learn them all." As the transport lifted off from the frozen surface of Kepler 442c, Jake looked out the window at his igloo. The structure would stand there until the next storm knocked it down or the spring melts dissolved it back into the ground. But the knowledge that built it would last forever. Passed from teacher to student across the galaxy. The age of human survival techniques spreading to the stars had begun, and it started with 3 aliens who learned that sometimes the oldest ways are the best ways. Jake Morrison had given them more than shelter from a storm. He had given them a new way of thinking about survival itself.